And I'll be by the.
And then and this. Okay. Thank you. All right. Good morning. How are you?
Next class, human sexuality.
Is that a good one?
Yeah, so we're talking about love styles, and so like it's all about how your attachment style as a child dictates your love style as an adult. So super interesting. I feel like it could be better, but I like the idea.
The concept's there. It's good to just make people analyze that.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about, and it's crazy how true it is.
You're like, ah, crap.
Exactly. Give them like another minute.
Oh, sure. So where are you gonna go from Florida?
It goes from Miami to Nassau, so to the Bahamas,
Oh, nice.
and then to Haiti
Oh, wow.
and Jamaica and Coco Cay, like their private island, and then back to Miami. So it's a week.
So I am surprised to hear that Haiti has tourism
I know.
at this point.
Yeah.
Like, did they carve out just like a tiny little?
Yeah, right. I don't know.
It's gonna be interesting for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll see. I think that they have like a very small pocket that they
Yeah.
use for
Dress
like
it
the
up.
tourism
Right.
area, and then the rest of it is like they don't encourage
Devastated.
you to go
Right.
outside of that anyway, right?
Right.
I forget, we went on one, I think it was to Honduras, our last one, and then they were like, do not leave this zone.
Right. Correct.
Like, if you
Yeah.
do, you're on your own.
Good plan.
Yeah, so
It's good for your kids to see though.
it is, it's really like,
And to have those conversations.
yeah.
It is. I'm just very surprised that there's even any of it. It just has been so devastated by lots of stuff.
I know, a lot of those areas, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then
yeah.
like all these hurricanes, I'm sure are
helping.
helping.
Oh, for sure, for sure.
Look at you, we should almost make a little cluster.
Right.
All right, well, I'll give them their stuff in the business part, usually.
Yeah. How are you? So
They get tackled when they come in, they get tackled when they leave.
See, 10 minutes later.
When I started teaching, I'd like forget to breathe, and then I'd be like lecturing, and I was like, I haven't breathed, and then
I'm in like the best shape I've been in a long time because I've been coaching like a soccer team and a softball team.
That's awesome.
And it's like 6 days a week that I'm doing.
So you're like, I'm
in shape. Yeah.
All right. Okay.
All right, my select few that are here, right, as we start, I'm gonna hand the floor over to our two guest speakers today. I think they have some instructions for you for something to fill out, but please feel free to ask them questions and answer their questions as we go along. And definitely, be paying attention. Don't say you have to take notes, but be paying attention as some of the things, at the very least, like what does QPR stand for, right? Make sure you know that as well. So they are all yours, and we go to 9:45. And I'll be right here.
Perfect. Seeing the capital right.
Right here.
Great. And you're gonna do an advanced
Yeah.
room?
Do you want to do the intro usually?
Sure, absolutely. Well, good morning, everybody. We're so glad to be here with you this morning. So my name is Allison Barton. I'm the coordinator at the Student Health Center, and this is Jasmine Betkin. She's our awesome health educator here. And today we've been invited to train you in the QPR method. The QPR means question, persuade, and refer. And it's the suicide prevention curriculum that we use on our campus. And it's important to know that QPR was developed by a psychologist up in the Washington State, Phil Quino. I never know how to say his name, Quino. And it's because of the very high suicide rates up there. And he developed this whole program to create what we call gatekeepers, kind of like citizen responders, right? But instead of CPR, you're doing QPR. So you'll learn today how to recognize signs and symptoms that somebody might be suffering from depression, that they might be thinking about suicide, and what to do about that. So this is not you turning into a mental health provider. This is you just learning the simple things about how to recognize when somebody's having these issues and how to help them the best way you can, right? Does that make sense? While we are having this discussion today, you may find that, you know somebody who's tried to kill themselves, or you yourself have had those thoughts before, or made attempts before, and this may be too much for you. And if it is, and you need to leave, that's okay, but we need you to check in with us, right? So we need one of us, but particularly your instructor is very good at catching you before you go. Sometimes you just have to pee, and it's okay. Just let us know. I'm just going to the bathroom. I'll be right back, right? Because we'll worry about you otherwise, okay? Does that make sense? Yeah, so we want you to take care of yourself, do the right thing for you today. And we also want you to participate and answer questions and ask questions and those kinds of things so that you learn the best you can. There's also at the end going to be a time to practice and too. So you should feel pretty comfortable with this before we're done this afternoon. Any questions, comments, concerns thus far? Hey, did I cover everything? All right. So then we're gonna start. Jasmine's gonna get us started. Okay.
All right, awesome. So this first section I'm going to run you through is more of kind of some of the data and statistics behind suicide. And I think the biggest thing I just want people to take away from this is we love data, we love statistics because it helps us understand a problem potentially, or maybe who might be at a greater risk. But none of the populations we talk about, is it because that person's part of that population that there's this inherent risk of suicide, right? It's more about social kind of constructs around things. And so I just kind of want us to understand that as we break things up by whether that's identity or race or ethnicity, that's not like an inherent cause of potential suicide. It's more that, hey, these populations sometimes face additional barriers which can impact mental health. And then, like I said, we're just kind of setting the stage with some of the background data on it. All right. Thanks. Okay. So our goals today, which I think Allison covered really well, right? We want to look at early warning signs for suicide. And the goal there really is let's catch it as soon as we can and let's connect someone to resources. And we want to be able to feel comfortable doing bold intervention. Again, none of you here that I know of are licensed mental health providers. So your goal isn't to provide the mental health treatment. It's to make that intervention, feel comfortable making that intervention and referring that person to the resources they need. And that can help with early professional assessment and treatment. And then also, this is a hard topic to talk about, right? I think it's impacted so many people. And so mental health in general, and specifically suicide, when we have these conversations, we get to decrease stigma around it. And we get to have honest conversations and talk about what we can do. So QPR is not intended to be a form of counseling or treatment. It is intended to offer hope through positive action. That is our goal here today, is to help you to intervene, to offer someone hope and resources through positive action on your part. So some data just in general, I will say with some of the data, like some of the data is back from like 2021 or even a little bit older. We don't always get the most updated statistics every year, so we find the closest we can. We really are curious about more recent data just because of COVID, right? COVID's changed a lot of things. But the data we have here for 2021, looking in the United States, is that 12.3 million adults seriously thought about suicide, 3.5 million adults made a plan, and 1.7 million attempted suicide. So that is a lot. That's one death every 11 minutes. When we kind of shrink it down to California, there was 4,143 suicides in 2020. That's 10.4 suicides per 100,000 people. So kind of looking at what does suicide rates look like in our state. And then when we shrink it down even more, this is from the Ventura County Health Needs Assessment. And this was from a few years ago, the last time they did the assessment, but suicide is the 9th leading cause of death in our county. And then we can bring it even smaller to Moore College. So every few years, we do the American College Health Needs Assessment. So the last time we did was in 2022. And 4.4% of our students reported that they've attempted suicide within the last 12 months. So this is something that, again, on our campus, this is why we're having those conversations. So what we know is that culture matters. Stigma and judgment prevent people in the US from seeking treatment for their mental health. And research indicates that some cultures kind of view mental health not in terms of, yes, let's address mental health needs, but more that, oh, if you say you're having this tough time, you're crazy, right? You're not seen as like, that's okay to get treatment. You just need to get over it. You're being crazy. And so we know that culture matters, and how we're kind of raised in the culture around us, around mental health, impacts the willingness to kind of seek help when needed. So again, we're going to break it down into a few specific communities. When we look at the Black community, we know that Black boys aged 10 to 13 are 2 to 3 times more likely to die by suicide than white boys 10 to 13. And I think one of the hardest things is the age bracket for what they're tracking for suicide is dropped. So they're now looking at 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds as well. Black men are particularly concerned about stigma surrounding mental health when they kind of survey in general. And then there's a big youth behavioral risk survey that's done nationally. And in 2019, they found that 15.2% of Black adolescent females reported a previous suicide attempt in 12 months prior. So that's a lot higher than 9.4% of non-Hispanic white females. When we look at youth, they tracked from 2001 to 2017, and Black females experienced a 183% increase rate of suicide. Black males experienced a 60% increase rate of suicide. When we kind of bring that back again, so what does this mean for our community here? When we look at the leading cause of death and we break it up by race and ethnicity, we see that for Black non-Hispanic individuals as well as white, suicide is up to the 6th leading cause of death in our county. When we look at the Latinx community, again, depending on kind of culture and maybe even family values, there's definitely can be some barriers to accessing care, including finding mental health providers that feel appropriate for your culture and beliefs. And so there's a lack of Latinx healthcare professionals available for those seeking help. That was something identified in our Ventura County Community Health Needs Assessment, that people felt they couldn't find a provider that matched their identity. And yet the prevalence of depression in Latinx women is higher than Latinx men, and there was still a barrier, an issue to finding appropriate mental health care. When we look at the Asian Pacific Island community, suicide was the 2nd leading cause of death between the ages of 15 and 34. And among all Asian Americans, those aged 20 to 21 had the highest suicide rate. So 20 to 21 is that's college age, right? A lot of people in college at that age. And then in Asian American cultures, again, looking at kind of some generalized views of culture, sometimes stoicism is really a high value, and that can make it then, if you talk about mental health, to be seen as like a weakness or something that you shouldn't be verbally expressing, and that creates a barrier to kind of expressing the need for help. When we look at white community specific, when we look kind of overall across all suicide rates, so I know it can be like a little confusing because we're looking at like certain age ranges and certain races and ethnicities. If we go zoom back out and we look across the board, white males have the highest suicide rate, In California, 61% of suicides were by people who were white. And then zooming a little bit again back to kind of specific identity, there's more and more studies that kind of show inequities in mental health care access within the LGBTQIA plus community. And so 69% of LGBTQ plus youth reported feeling persistently sad and hopeless compared to 35% of heterosexual youth. And this was seen similar in county data and other data where it's usually about 2 times the rate of kind of either depression, anxiety, or sadness. LGBTQI plus people attempt suicide at 5 times the rate of heterosexual individuals, 8.5 times if is family rejection. And so this goes back again, it's not because of identity that's causing mental health problems. It's things like rejection, acceptance, social norms, social pressure that can increase kind of those persistent feelings of sadness or anxiety. And then again, linking back to in our county, in the Ventura County Health Needs Assessment, a lot of people felt that they couldn't find a mental health provider that understood their needs, whether that was appropriate pronouns or identity. Even people said they specialized in that. When we look at the veteran community, in 2020, there were over 6,000 veterans who died by suicide. That means that 20 veterans die by suicide each day in the US. It's the second leading cause of death among veterans under the age of 45. And so when you look at the whole population and the veteran population, and you make all those statistical adjustments, the veteran rate of suicide is 57.3 times higher than non-veteran populations. And veterans account for 13.9% of all suicides among adults in the United States. We can also kind of look at age, and it sometimes surprises people that our kind of older population has higher rates of suicide. We kind of see this peak in maybe the 20 region, 20s to 30s, and then again at over 85 or even over 75. Why do we think that may be? Why do we think that there may be higher rate of suicide in older adults? Any guesses? Yeah, I'll go over that first.
I think it's gonna be in the family instead of the friends.
Yeah, okay, so like they don't feel like they have that family support anymore, they're kind of detached and what's the point type situation, okay. And then did you have anything to add?
I work with a lot of it is just loneliness. Happens around the states where busy.
Yeah.
And the feeling of being a massive burden.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think you both summarized that really well. We have that feeling of being a burden, that social isolation, potentially health risks as well, right? Like I don't have quality of life because I'm sick. Why am I here? And then I'm not at home with my family and I'm lonely. And so all of that really does kind of create this spike in potential suicide rates among our older population. And so I think the important thing there is sometimes we don't always focus on that, right? We think they're older, they've been around this long, they're fine, but they have mental health needs as well. And then why do we think maybe sometimes in this, the college age or kind of those 20s, what are some of the common stressors that maybe add to some challenges in that age range? What do you start doing? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of transitioning. You're going from like potentially under, you know, parents or guardians to like becoming your own human and transitioning in college and job and stress and money and all the like things that kind of umbrella under adulting. All of that, right? It's a lot. And so that can put a lot of pressure on kind of our younger adults in our community. And then so just to, I know that data often kind of breaks down just the binary male female, and that doesn't really include everyone, but in Ventura County, we did see in the male population that the rate of suicide was higher than kind of the averaged out. So in the male population, it's the 7th leading cause of death. And then at Moore Park College, so bringing it back home, right? Bringing it here, going back to that college health needs assessment. So the higher the score, the higher the risk of suicide. And what we saw here, so a positive suicidal screening, that again, the higher the number, the higher the risk. We had 30% about of our cis men, 32.3% of cis women, and almost 70% of transgender and gender nonconforming students had at a high positive screening for the risk of suicide. Okay, so I think again, we're still like kind of in that transitional phase of what does COVID mean in our life, but thinking back on these last 4 years, which for some people feel like 40 years, what has COVID done that's impacted our mental health? What are some of the things that you all have noticed with COVID? Yeah.
Also feel like that happened to me, but I feel like just the social aspect of everything is so different now, and everyone's very much more isolated. All that time alone, I really had to like
Yeah.
go in person versus
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. How do people in person? I love that. Like that is, I think, a great summary for COVID. How do we people in person? Love it. Yeah, there was a lot, and depending how old you were, that maybe kind of took part of those really formative years of how do you meet people? How do you network? How do you just talk to someone? Like, how do you be in a classroom? All of that. What else? What were some of the other kind of impacts of COVID on mental health? It doesn't have to be you personally, you can just share generally in society. What do we think? I mean, there's like a huge thing of things we can pull from for this. There's a lot. Yeah. Yeah, of course.
I feel like after COVID and then just during, I feel like our society became very divided, especially with everything that was happening.
Yeah.
I think after that, we kind of never went back from that, and I feel like now, like, we're just so divided. And
Yeah. Yeah. And that division creates this loss of sense of community, loss of trust, who's on my side versus not side, right? Like we create sides from that. And so yeah, COVID was compounded with all of these social justice issues happening at the same time, all of these political conversations happening at the same time. And that kind of then you're adding all those issues while you're alone and isolated and not really able to have conversations with people about it. So yeah, they're definitely created that gap. So whether it was kind of how things impacted you with socialization or in general socialization, or whether even academic loss, like you maybe were on a trajectory and COVID changed that trajectory, or the learning styles available weren't well suited for you. And then also a lot of grief and loss, like especially those early days when people were losing family members and not able to be there with them. Or kind of also they maybe didn't lose them, but that person has some long-term health issues from COVID now. Now they kind of have to be caregivers. And so it changed so many roles. Where people live, did they move back home potentially? What does that do for them? Who were they isolating with? Do they have anyone? There was a lot that changed, even down to like you hear dating horror stories during COVID, right? Like everything changed. And really kind of, again, the reason for all these statistics too is to know that like culture matters. And when we don't have culturally and linguistically appropriate suicide prevention and mental health treatment options, and we don't have a diverse enough pool of people to kind of help with mental health within the workforce, sometimes that makes it really challenging for people. So what worked for someone where they're like, well, I went to therapy and that was great for me, that doesn't always work for someone else until they find that right mental health provider for them, someone that understands their culture, understands what they need as a person. And that's kind of a big part of offering hope as well, is sometimes people are like, well, it didn't work for me, but maybe if you try a different person, right? Maybe if you try something else. And so that's a big thing. And then also just being in a psychology class today, right? How do we diversify and get more mental health providers trained across a whole different culture of people, and not just kind of one size fits all? So looking at methods of suicide, we won't spend too much time because this isn't the most important thing of the whole presentation, right? But within kind of overall, firearms tends to be the highest method of suicide, followed by suffocation, poisoning, and other. The reason some of this does fit in is Allison will cover more some of the potential cues, but certain things like all of a sudden stockpiling pills or obtaining a gun, and that's not someone who's like, I go hunting with my family or whatever, right? That's where this does kind of like give us a little bit of, okay, what are some things we might want to watch out for? And at the end of the day, when we look at all of the data, the biggest kind of contributor for suicide or warning sign for suicide is undiagnosed and untreated depression. And the number one symptom we see is hopelessness. And again, so that's where a big part of today is how can we offer hope for someone? All right, this is not a trick question. Just someone describe what they see in this brain versus this brain. I feel like sometimes when the question seems a little easy, people are like, I don't know, what are you trying to trick me here with? There's no tricks. What do we see here versus here? Yeah.
There's a lot less activity going on.
On this one? Yeah, it's like way more blue, less bright and colorful. Perfect. Yeah, I mean, that was it. Great answer. Perfect. So what we see is in the not depressed brain, this is like a functional brain MRI scan, and we see this brain lit up and working, and the connections are being made. And then when we look at a depressed brain, there's not that light, right? Those connections aren't being made. So this is a big thing because I think a lot of times with the stigma of depression still is like, well, buck up, buttercup. Like if you just go do something fun, you're gonna be super happy. But when your brain's not functioning at that level, that's not always possible, right? You can't just be like, yeah, I'm gonna go get some ice cream and feel good, yay, right? It's just not that simple. And so that's where talking about it and knowing that there's a clinical difference between brains, it helps, right? It helps that conversation. Okay, who can tell me some of the symptoms of depression that they may be aware of? What might we be looking for or being like, huh? What are some? Yeah. Yeah,
Lack of passion, what they like to do.
absolutely, yeah. Lack of passion / loss of interest. I feel like that's the two you're getting at. Perfect. What else? This is a quiz, I'm kidding. Ah, wonderful. You did a great job teaching that. Yes. Sleeping too much or not sleeping at all?
I'm sure about increasing or decreasing their weight because they're not eating.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like either excessively eating or not eating for sure. Anything else?
That was a great start.
Yeah, that's a pretty pretty solid start and like very like perfect on the wording. Yeah. Lack of energy, absolutely, like a lack of energy, having a hard time even just getting out of bed, doing daily tasks for sure. So I feel like we hit a good chunk of these. So loss of interest, pleasure, or motivation, heightened emotion, right? Something that's like that person tends not to maybe react in that way and something pretty small happens and you see a really big reaction from that. Feelings of profound sadness, guilt, or shame, fatigue or loss of energy, that was definitely touched upon. And then changes in eating and sleeping pattern. And I think we kind of talked about that really well. You all knew the exact, like, it could be too much or it could be too little. So there's no like, well, it can be kind of either direction. Also, problems concentrating or making decisions. Like you may just see someone struggling to stay in that moment, stay concentrated, or make a pretty simple, what seems like a simple decision. And then withdrawing from family and friends. I kind of made one word, family. Withdrawing from friends or family. So someone who maybe tends to go out and hang out with friends, all of a sudden keeps passing like they don't want to. Or they kind of become more and more distant from family. That's a big kind of symptom as well as, again, we talked about helplessness or hopelessness. So just feeling like, what's the point? I can't do this anymore. There's no hope. Nothing's going to get better. And then thoughts of death or suicide or wishing to be dead. So this one, it can be like that feeling, but also sometimes like that kind of grappling with the, well, it wouldn't be that bad if I died in a car crash. Well, it wouldn't be that bad if I went to bed and didn't wake up, right? So that kind of thoughts of death or suicide. Okay, And I think too, one thing I feel like we was not on the list or I just missed it. Sometimes like hygiene changes, so like the inability to take care of oneself or like all of a sudden not really like showering or not really like getting changed, things like that. That can also be a symptom as well. All right, everyone with me so far? All right, we're gonna keep going through this. So I think a big thing is missing facts. And this was actually, I was super happy that like I'm part of this training because I teach as well at another college, and one of my students was like, well, there's absolutely nothing you can do if someone's suicidal. And I was like, whoa, no, that's why we're all here today, right? We're here because we do believe that there's things we can do. And so that's kind of a really common myth, is that we can't stop a suicide, it's inevitable. If someone wants to do it, they're gonna find a way. What we know is that if people in a crisis get help, they may never be suicidal again. So when someone gets that appropriate help and connection to resources, they may never be suicidal again. And then there's also kind of this myth of like, well, if I confront someone, if I'm worried they're suicidal and I confront them, that's going to make them like only more likely to commit suicide. They're going to like rush to it. In all the years, and Allison has a lot more experience with this than me in our whole health center, they always say that most people feel relieved when someone asks them. That like in all the years, like 99.9% of the students where they maybe were considering suicide, the second someone asks them, they actually feel relieved by that. And that when you ask someone about suicide, it actually kind of lowers the anxiety and it opens up that ability to communicate and make that less of an impulsive act. And so that goes kind of to in the next one, only experts can prevent suicide. We wouldn't be here today if we didn't think that we all have a role in potentially stopping a suicide, right? So suicide prevention is everyone's business, and anyone can help prevent the tragedy of a suicide. And I think this is a big thing too, and sometimes culturally that's harder. Age, like if you're, or even like gender dynamics, all of that, that we feel like, well, that's not my business, right? And that can be really hard for us to be like, I'm just going to get involved. Or if I don't feel comfortable, I'm going to get the right person to get involved with this situation. I do want to go back just real quick on that first one though. Sometimes people do know someone they've lost to suicide, and that's not saying that like that someone is responsible for that. It's that we don't want to have that idea that if someone's suicidal, there's nothing we can do. Okay, and then suicidal people keep their plans to themselves. Again, not true. When we look at the data, when we look at experiences, most people who are suicidal communicate their intent to some degree, usually within that week. So like they might drop little hints or drop little things, and I know Allison will cover kind of more of that when she goes through the actual training of it. And then this is like, again, so popular. Who's heard the like, well, if they talk about it, they're not doing it, right? They're just looking for attention. They're not actually going to do it. We need to take every statement serious if someone says they're suicidal. We don't want to assume that because they're talking about it, they are not going to do it. And so that's a really big one. And then kind of going back to there's nothing we can do to stop them. Suicide's the most preventable kind of death. Any positive interaction essentially can save a life. Any kind of delaying, any connecting to resources, any getting anyone involved, that's a huge potential to stopping suicide. And again, we know that culture plays a role in mental health. And so there's no group that's culturally immune. There's no like, well, we don't have to worry about them. They're strong. They're this, they're that. There's no culture that's like immune to suicide. Okay, suicide clues and warning signs. The more clues and signs, the greater the risk. So take all signs seriously. So all the things we've talked about so far, the more we see kind of compiled, the greater the risk. I'm still going? I was like, I feel like this section. I was like, it's still me. I'm still talking. Okay. Whoa. I was like, and you know when you like think the movie's gonna end and you're gonna pass the mic and you're like still going. Okay. So when we look at I was like, still me. Woo! Okay. So when we look at all of the signs we're kind of talking about and looking, there's different things we can categorize, right? Direct and kind of indirect cues. So when we look at direct verbal clues, that may be someone saying, I've decided to kill myself. Now, there's like certain times that we have to take context into that. And there's you kind of have to like judge that for yourself, because someone may say, if I don't get an A on this test, I'm going to kill myself. And the way they say it seems very lighthearted and very like, or when someone's like, oh, just kill me now, I got a B. We need to understand that cue versus there was an incident where someone said, if I don't get an A on this test, I'm going to kill myself. And they really meant that. And they meant that because that A was what was going to determine them getting into med school or not. That A was what was going to determine their parents' acceptance of their career or not. And so that family pressure, that personal pressure, that career pressure, that not getting an A on that math test was a direct verbal cue that that person wanted to kill themselves. So being really aware of like, also I think that makes us have a little bit more responsibility. Like, I know I'm super sensitive when people even just joke about like, oh, just shoot me now. I'm like, no, don't say that. Like, we're just in a world that's not okay to say, right? And so even like with friends, kind of calling people out on that in a nice way, or being really mindful of what you're saying, it helps, right? It helps with stigma, and it helps with knowing what we should and shouldn't say because of really needing to take things serious. Sometimes people would say, I wish I were dead. We talked about this, right? Like, it would be easier if I was gone. I wish I was dead. That's it. We need to take that as a direct verbal cue. Someone may be as like clear as saying, I'm going to commit suicide. I'm going to end it all. If this and this doesn't happen, I'll kill myself, right? If I don't get into nursing school, I'll kill myself. Those are all direct verbal clues and cues. Ooh, jumping ahead here. Then sometimes, not everyone is that direct with their kind of statement. So we also need to be a little bit more in tune for those indirect verbal clues. And that may just be like, I'm tired of life and I just can't go on. We need to follow up on that statement. What do you mean you can't go on? What do you mean you're tired of life, right? Or feeling like my family would be better off without me. The world would be better if I wasn't here. Those are indirect verbal cues. Who cares if I'm dead anyways? I just want out. I won't be around much longer. Like, what do you mean? Are you moving? Are you like, what? You need to follow up on that, right? What do you mean you're not going to be around much longer? Pretty soon you won't have to worry about me. And these are all really common indirect verbal cues that we need to follow up on and see if that person is suicidal, and you will get the tools today, hopefully, to do that. Another kind of one, especially the younger generation, is like, I don't think I'll live past 21. There's a lot of times people see like that, I'm just gonna die young. And they may even live in a way where like they're kind of challenging that in some ways, right? Driving super fast, drinking and driving, engaging in risky behaviors. That is something we need to assess and talk about. I'm sick of it and everyone's sick of me. That's another big one, right? I'm sick of it. I just can't do this anymore. I won't do it anymore. Getting the context around that and having that conversation. And again, culture and context determine language and idioms and how we kind of say things. It's all very relative. Like people now, you like joke and like dead. Like, okay, that's different. Like, we got to take culture and context into it. But again, being mindful of what we're saying because of how impactful words are. And I'll say, even if you think someone's joking, I don't think that's bad to call someone out and ask them, like, what? Like, are you joking about this or not? Because that's serious. And then we also have behavioral clues to look for. So anyone with a previous suicide attempt, that is considered a behavioral clue to kind of pay attention to. We talked about this when we talked about methods of suicide. So acquiring guns or stockpiling pills, things like that, where they seem like they're doing something for, like that out of the norm, especially or not taking their medication and stockpiling it. When we have like a co-occurring issue of depression, moodiness, and hopelessness, right? We have hopelessness as that symptom and depression as that cause. And when those two come together, that's a really big risk factor. Putting personal affairs in order. If someone is in like a military background, someone knows they have a health condition, someone's older, things like that, makes sense. You're like, thanks for putting your personal affairs in order. It saves us a lot of stress. Great. Okay. But when someone is young and healthy, and that's not like a norm within maybe their family said, hey, you know, we all need to do this and we're doing it as a family or da 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 da. That's a big thing. If someone all of a sudden is putting their personal affairs in order or giving away prized possessions. If you want to tell the story you have.
Yeah, so when my son was in middle school, you probably don't even know about this, but it was all the fad to have these really fancy trapper keeper binders for all your stuff. It was like every kid had one. And one of his friends gave his trapper keeper to him. Right? And started giving away other prized possessions like that. And David came home with this trapper keeper. Where did this come from? Oh, my friend gave it to me. I guess he didn't want it anymore. And his friend killed himself, like within days of that. I didn't know about this stuff, and I probably would have said something like call the mom and whatever. So it just goes to show you, like, that was a really big sign that something was amiss, that this kid was giving away this prized possession.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, really, really looking at things like that. And again, putting it into context is really helpful. A sudden interest or disinterest in religion. Again, people kind of explore religion in different ways. Potentially, they may all of a sudden, you know, want to rejoin religion, this or that. We're looking more for like a dramatic change where all of a sudden it's like, no religion to extremely religious without that, like, oh, I had this personal journey of exploration or vice versa, right? Drug or alcohol abuse or relapse, especially after a period of recovery. We know that alcohol really intensifies that kind of like that lowering of the threshold for suicide risk. And so drugs and alcohol really are a huge co-occurrence, and knowing that. And so someone maybe had a period of sobriety, and now that they lost that can increase that feeling of hopelessness and kind of that self-worth and value, as well as knowing that drugs and alcohol change the brain's chemistry and make it harder to kind of process through things. Unexplained anger, aggression, or irritability, seeking revenge, or talking or writing about death. This is a big one in academics because, like, you all may be working on papers, and sometimes this is where we see things come across, right? Like an essay someone writes, or like someone, like you're all exploring one thing and someone kind of keeps on this negative track of like death, not in a like, let's look at the ethics of, you know, the Death with Dignity Act, not like that, right? In a kind of a different way. So that's a big one in academics. And then also engaging in risky activities. Some people are more risk takers. I think also age sometimes plays into how much risk you're willing to take. But when we kind of have that continual risky activity behavior, that may show that that person's not really having that self-preservation or concern for themselves. And then I'm going to go through a little quicker on this one. Situational clues, so being fired or suspended from school, anything where we feel like that's the end of our path and that's all I was meant to do, right? Or I lost my job, now I can't support myself or my family. A recent or unwanted move, this is especially common in like high school, right? Maybe you don't have that enough autonomy to say like, I'm staying here where I want to go, and your family moves somewhere else. So that's a big one. Loss of a major relationship, again, really big, especially college, high school, things like that, where loss of a relationship like can make someone feel like they don't want to live anymore. That person was their only person, and now they want to kill themselves because of that. Death of a spouse, child, or best friend, especially if that person died by suicide, and sometimes too that survivor's guilt of why didn't I see that, why didn't I notice that sign. And then diagnosis of a serious or terminal illness, and that can be out of fear of what the disease will do, but also out of fear of not wanting to be a burden. Sudden and unexpected loss of freedom or fear of punishment. So someone who maybe got in trouble with the law and now they're with the judicial system and they're kind of worried about like, am I going to go to jail? What's the consequence there? Anticipated loss of financial security. So again, losing assets, losing money, things like that, getting fired. The fear of becoming a burden to others. Humiliation, bullying, and exploitation. Like this has just increased so much, especially with social media, especially in our younger generations, and the way that that can look. But even just if someone kind of is exploiting you, or there's some sort of humiliation you've experienced. And then loss of a cherished therapist, counselor, or teacher, especially if this was someone who you maybe felt like, or this person felt like saved them or really helped them, or that was the only one who understood them. And if that person's gone, that can make it feel like they don't have that major support they had prior. Okay, now I pass it on. Okay.
All right, so I get to kind of do the fun part here, I guess. So now we're going to talk, now that we have this background, right, and we understand kind of the nuts and bolts of this, we're going to talk about the specific actions that you as a gatekeeper would take, right? So first of all, the Q means question. You're supposed to ask somebody, and that is like the hardest barrier for a lot of students, asking the question, are you thinking about killing yourself? It's really hard for a lot of people to do that, but that's really important. All right. So if you think that you see those signs and symptoms in somebody, don't say, oh, maybe it's not that, maybe it's something else. Just if you're in doubt, don't wait, ask the question, just ask it. Again, I will tell you, I have never had anybody get upset with me for asking that question. And they're relieved either because they aren't thinking about it, or they're relieved because they were thinking about it. So either way, ask the question, right? If they're reluctant to answer, which I have not had that experience from anybody. And it may be the way I ask, but I've not had that experience from anybody. Be persistent. Hey, you're not answering my question, right? The other thing is talk to the person alone in a private kind of environment. I wouldn't go up to you in the middle of class and say, hey, are you thinking about killing yourself? I would want to take them to a private kind of area and let the person talk freely about it. They may need to take a few words to say it's not a simple yes or no, right? Or they may not have even realized it yet. Sometimes people kind of have to talk about it a little bit and realize that's even what's going on. Make sure you give yourself plenty of time. If you're in a rush to get somewhere else, you can do a number of things. You can have somebody else ask for you, and we can talk a little bit about how that would look, or you can just, put a pin in it for a little bit later, like maybe after class, or maybe let's meet for coffee or something like that. Do you know what I'm saying? Put a pin in it, but get to it as soon as possible. And then have your resources ready. So we gave you a couple of resources. We gave you your booklet. You don't have to look at it now. Everything we're saying is in the booklet, but there are a lot of resources in there. The card that is in there has resources that are available at the Student Health Center right here on campus. And so those are handy too. We've got a few slides later on that you can actually take a picture of, and you can put those resources, the phone numbers and websites and things like that, in your phone, so you can send the information to somebody or rapidly get to it on your phone, right? So that's nice too. And if you notice with your services card, there's a detachable portion that you could actually hand the person or give them the whole card. So we did it that way on purpose, so you could have that handy. So remembering how you ask the question is not as important as that you ask the question. And we're going to talk about different ways of asking the question. Okay, but that's the key thought process right here. All right. So there are some less direct approaches. Have you been unhappy lately? You can kind of sneak up to the question, right? Have you been very unhappy lately? Have you been so unhappy that you've been thinking about ending your life? I don't even say ending your life anymore. I say hurting yourself or killing yourself. That's what I say. It feels like I'm sort of sneaking up to it, but we also are worried about people hurting themselves too, right? There's a different action that we take depending on how they answer that question, but that's how I ask it. And then with little children, they don't always understand the idea of death or killing themselves. So do you wish that you could go to sleep and never wake up? That's a good way to ask children that question. Does that make sense to everybody so far? Okay. And then being direct.
You know, when people are hurting and as upset as you are, sometimes they wish they were dead. I'm wondering if you're feeling that way too. Or are you thinking of killing yourself? Again, I say, are you thinking about hurting yourself or killing yourself? It's very simple, but I say it's very simple, but I think it takes practice and it makes you feel kind of awkward and crying and that kind of thing at first. So I like to have people repeat that question to themselves so that their mouths even feel comfortable saying the words. Does that make sense? Okay, good. If you feel like you can't ask, like maybe you could ask a stranger, but you'd have a really hard time asking your best friend, or maybe you couldn't really ask your mom, but you could ask somebody else. If everybody has relationships that are like that, if you feel like you can't ask the question, it's important to find somebody who can. So if it's, especially if it's here at school and it's another student, one thing you could do is walk them to the student health center. We are happy to ask that question. Okay, we have students walking other students to the health center, instructors walking students to the health center all the time because they're worried about their mental health. And the person doesn't have to be suicidal to help them, right? They could say, no, but I'm really bummed out, or I'm really having a lot of anxiety, or I'm really anxious, or I just broke up with my boyfriend, or whatever. We have plenty of mental health services for any of that. You don't have to be suicidal to get treatment, right? That's another good opportunity to walk your friend or classmate to the student health center. Does that make sense? That's a great way to handle it here at school during our hours. All right. How not to ask the question. You're not thinking of killing yourself, are you? You wouldn't do anything stupid, would you? Suicide is a dumb idea. Surely you're not thinking about suicide, right? So what is wrong with that? Why would those not be great ways to ask? Yeah. Yeah, you're kind of adding to the stigma, right? Yeah, what else? What else could go wrong when you're asking it that way? Yeah.
Immediately makes them like they're not gonna do that.
Sure, I don't wanna say the wrong thing, I don't wanna do the wrong thing, right? Yeah.
I was just gonna say like, if they are thinking about it and finding like dumb, like that's not a.
Yeah, no, it's not. No, it's not at all. It's very disrespectful, and it's sort of projecting what society's right answer is too, right? Like if you don't say no, then. Does that make sense? So you don't want to ask it in that way. I try to, when I ask the question, I try to make it sound like it's not an uncommon thing for people to think about that. That reduces the stigma. It makes people feel like, oh, I'm not alone. The other people are having this issue. And for me, as a person, when there's something wrong with me or something that, you know, I'm experiencing a health problem, to know that other people have had it and there's a way to treat it is really reassuring to me. So that's kind of what you want to do, right? When you're asking the question in the more appropriate way. All right. So once you have the answer, yes or no, then you persuade the somebody to stay alive. Now, what if they said, no, I'm not thinking about hurting myself, but you still notice that something wrong with them, like something's not quite right. Do you just say, oh, good, okay, see you later? Or should you still ask, you know, offer to give them some help? Obviously, something's not right, right? Even if they're not thinking about hurting themselves, they're still depressed or anxious or whatever. So there's still treatment, there's still help, student health center and other places. And you can refer them that way. Yeah. But say they are thinking about hurting themselves. It's a really good, or killing themselves. It's a really good idea to listen to the problem. Suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem, right? Most people's problem that's prompting this sudden change is temporary, right? So your boyfriend broke up with you, and although it feels like a lifelong, terrible load to carry, it's a temporary thing, right? Or you lost your job, or you got fired, or you whatever, is actually a temporary problem,
right? It just feels too big for the person that's having that problem at that time, right? And I'm sure all of us can think of a time when something that we could barely remember now seemed like the biggest thing ever, right? So that's how it can feel to somebody who's also dealing with depression and we're also dealing with anxiety. Does that make sense? So thinking about the whole problem, sometimes you can help with the problem, right? Remember that suicide is not a problem, only a solution to a perceived problem. It's that permanent solution to a temporary problem, and not judging. With the situation that Jasmine was mentioning earlier about the student saying, I'm going to kill myself if I don't get an A in this math class. Most people would be really happy with a B in math, right? And so to say, what's wrong with you? You're getting a B+ in this class, that's very judgmental and that doesn't help. So, saying something more along the lines of, this seems like it's very upsetting to you. Let's see what we can do to help you is a better choice, right? Offering hope in any form. Oh, you can't get to work because of the tire being flat. Why don't we go to financial aid and get a small loan, or let me drive you to work, or because there are lots of solutions like that that are very helpful and immediately remove the stress to the student. Let me walk you to the tutoring center. They have free tutoring. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't want to belittle the problems. They feel enormous to the person, but there are some pretty simple solutions to a lot of problems, especially that students have on this campus. We refer to access and tutoring and the student health center all the time. Financial aid, right? Other resources that we have on campus. So offering hope in any form can be pretty simple here because you have so many resources available to you. So persisting in statements that suicide is not a good solution and suggest that better alternatives can be found. You can be treated. You have access to free mental health services, those kinds of things, right? Focusing on the healthy alternative, not the suicide solution, just what I just said, right? Accept the reality of the person's pain. That must feel overwhelming to you right now. Let's find somebody for you to talk to help you with some solutions, right? Yeah, it's real to them, even though it may seem so silly to you. Collaborating with them to let them know that you have support. Let me walk you to the student health center. Let me help you get counseling. Let me help you get tutoring, whatever it is. Offering hope in any form. We can get through this. You can get through this. I will help you. Let's find some help for you. Okay? You're a team. So if they tell you they've had treatment before and it hasn't worked, try asking, what if it does work this time? We know that a lot of people have been through multiple therapists, or maybe they've been through one. It just wasn't, it was kind of a negative experience. We have 9 therapists on our campus now. And if you don't get along with one, chances are very good there's another one that you will, right? We have so many choices, so much availability. We have no waiting period for our mental health providers on this campus. So that's just something you can say to somebody. The other thing is, depending on the situation, another thing you can say is, but you're still alive. But it seemed to have that effect. It depends on the situation, but that's something else that's a good response to that. All right. And then once you get to the point where you're persuading them to get some help, then you refer. This is where you are not the therapist, unless you are. I bet you wouldn't be in this class if you were then. So this is where you say suicidal people often believe they can't, or this is what they think they can't be helped, so you have to do more. The best referral is to say, let's go over and get some help. Let's call the suicide hotline that's already on your phone. We'll do that together. Whatever you can do with the person in the moment is the best thing, right? Next best is, will you let me help you get help, right?
So it may not be walking them there, but it may be making some phone calls with them or whatever. And then will you promise me not to kill yourself until you've found some help? Here are some resources. I want to make sure you have that. So, giving them information and then following up with the person afterwards, sometimes that's the best you can do. But even then, you're planting a seed in the person's brain that there's something that they can do to help themselves not feel so terrible and not feel so suicidal. Your willingness to listen and help can rekindle hope and make all the difference. The other thing to mention here is, and Jasmine mentioned it earlier, is that commitment to sobriety is really important. Alcohol in particular is a depressant, and it also reduces the inhibition of people for anything. Right, and so if they're feeling sad and suicidal and they are drinking alcohol, that's gonna make them more depressed and more suicidal. So it's really important to understand that piece. The person's been sober and then they use again. That can be a real tip off, right? Okay, so this is a good slide to take a picture of if you have your camera handy. So the National Suicide Hotline is 988. And you can call that number with the person sitting there and say, they will talk to the person, right? Right then and there. They're used to multiple people calling them in the same space, right? So that's a really important one. There's video relay service. So you saw the 911 and then 988. They have a special veterans line, so it's 988 and then press 1. The Trevor Lifeline is great. They for LGBTQIA plus people. That's a good one to call. We also have the crisis text line. That's texting only, and that's great. That's 741-741, and you just text the problem. So say you're in the middle of the night and you're feeling very sad, lonely, whatever, or your friend is calling you and letting you know that they're feeling that way, or you're with somebody, or they don't want to talk, they just want to text. A lot of us feel more comfortable texting. That's a really good choice. And you don't have to be suicidal to use that one. That's any mental health issues. I'm really anxious right now. I don't know what to do, those kinds of things, right? Yeah.
Super quick to the 988. They now don't only have a veterans line, they have a pride line. You can text pride to 988, or there's like online too. They have options. And so if like you're kind of looking for specific tailored response, 988 also has some other options now too.
We're gonna have to put that on our slide. Thank you so much for mentioning that. That's great. And then so in LA County, there's the DD Hirsch, and actually DD Hirsch handles our whole region now. So you can call that, but 988, they handle 988. So it's all kind of one. And then we have the crisis team here in Ventura County, which is great too. That's that 1-866 number. And a team may talk to you on the phone. They may come to you depending on the situation. So just be aware that all of these resources, but 988 is the easiest, and they also can link you to the crisis team, those kinds of things too. Any other? Okay, great. No, that's really helpful. No, that's awesome. Okay, so remember that Jasmine was mentioning linguistically and culturally appropriate mental health resources, really important. So you can often find both with insurance, they take your insurance too, or whatever, on these two websites. So one is psychologytoday.com and one is inclusivetherapists.com. And that's another good one to take a picture of, just so you have that handy if you're helping somebody find an appropriate therapist. Just so you know, we also have a case manager on our campus though. So if you or the person you're trying to help would like mental health services and you want somebody who is your religion or speaks your native language or is from an affinity group, LGBTQIA or something like that, she can help you with that too. We use her all the time. If we have a student, for example, who needs more than our 6 free sessions of mental health services, she'll help them find an appropriate provider in the community, right? So that's another service that we offer our students here. So here's the thing, you want to be safe yourself, right? So consider both the person's safety and your own. Call 911 if a person has a weapon or an object that can be used as a weapon, right? Don't go in there if they've got a gun or a knife or a club or something like that. You want to call 911 for that. If you're speaking over the phone with a person who has expressed intent to harm themselves or harm others, call 911 for that, right? If there's an overdose or you see the person is injured or passed out, right? That's a 911 call. And if the person wakes up and 911 comes and they don't actually need 911 services, 911 goes, the responders go away. So you're not hurting anybody by calling 911 in those instances. If you're confronted with a hostile armed person, leave immediately. Try to isolate the person if you can, but your safety is really, really important here. Try to attempt to observe what they're doing, where they're going, that kind of thing from your own personal safety, right? And then report what you observe to the 911 operator, right? So do not take that on yourself. There are other people that are more appropriate to do that. Okay. Almost all efforts to persuade someone to live instead of attempt suicide will be met with agreement and relief. I really can't stress that enough. They are relieved to hear you ask the question. So don't hesitate to get involved or take the lead. Does that make sense? All right. I want you to live, get others involved, maybe family members, other friends. Offer to assist in any way, follow up, especially if you gave the person resources and you don't know if they did anything, follow up with them, make sure that they followed through and offer to help them follow through if they did not do that, okay? All right, now it's time to practice in a very short period of time. So please get in pairs. And when you get in pairs, we're going to have one person be the gatekeeper, right? So you're going to read these instructions, and one person is going to be the troubled individual, and you're going to read these instructions. And then you're going to have an interaction where the QPR gatekeeper is going to end up asking the question, are you thinking of hurting yourself or whatever? You're going to ask the person if they're thinking of hurting themselves. That is the goal, is to have your mouth say those words, all right? And you have like 5 minutes to do it, right? So it's the speed version. This is the opposite of giving yourself enough time. So if you can get into pairs, I think we have an odd number of people. So do we have 15? Okay. All right. So maybe you 3 could be a group together over here, but kind of geographically just pair yourselves off. And then we'll get this started. All right. Okay, so maybe you can come a little closer. You can decide if, well, maybe 2 of you could be
gatekeepers together, and you could be the individual.
Does that sound good?
All right,
The wrong address.
I'm sorry, I didn't see it. Normally I see it on the first one. I don't know if it like got sent to, because I was like, okay, I always look out what, like, especially like, so I was like, who's a TP or something like sexual.
Right, and
I
it's like the FBI one, I was thinking of
Okay.
email
I
you.
was like, I always look out for emails, and then when you like, I emailed, I like looked back and I was like, no, so then I just like happened to check. Cause I know when I was a tutor, I think some people have their personal email.
I think that's why, I
And
think
so
that's what I
that's-
defaulted to.
I should have seen it there. I don't know why. I
How
didn't.
dare you?
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Give them like 3 minutes to do the survey.
Who?
3 minutes to do the survey.
That's all they have. That's all they get.
Ready to go?
That's all they get.
Alright, so here are my 2 days. I'll just give it to you, then I'll have to email you.
Perfect.
So it's the same room.
I'll do Wednesday.
Yeah, oh, that's right, because you're here on Monday. That
I'm
work?
on-
You should
Yeah,
pick
I'll
that.
do Wednesday. Thank you.
Okay. So Wednesday the 13th, alright. You want me to email you?
I'll put it in.
I'm
my
always
calendar.
happy to not have emails.
I'm good. Same thing, right? Just sticking with the.
Yeah, right here. That one is yours. Very, very. Very. Yeah. No, And I just submitted my rough draft manuscript 2 days ago. So now I just have to like edit it, but they already sent me like my cover, like everything.
That's awesome.
Like, this would be a hashtag in the hashtag's on it. But I'm so excited. I think it'll be great for, they're doing it in a print, but it's all about like the increase. So, it's looking at the health center fees, you know, it's like piggybacking. Fantastic.
Yeah. Conversation. Say nothing.
I think that I'll have it available for spring. So I'm gonna offer it as a one of so like as I have it, they can read it and can submit their full examples. Make a plan. Well, yeah. I know, tell me about it. It's hard to choose.
Because I'm not gonna get my all these.
No, you're good. I think that's one that was, I think it was supposed to like, if you don't use, and then they basically like, oh, I see it. You acknowledge it and then you.
Yeah.
I was talking to the class after about tips, like, emergency self. Strategies for like how to get into
Right, so let's come back in. Get to the question. Nice, wow, that's a rather high percentage. Good job. How did it feel? It felt a little weird. So here's the thing. It used to feel really weird to me too. But the more I said it, the more I feel comfortable saying it. And here's the thing. This is gonna sound so silly, but practicing your mouth the same words really does make a big difference. And if you come up with a go-to way to ask it, it makes it way easier. Like, are you thinking about hurting yourself or killing yourself? There's a really simple way for me to do it. So come up with your own way. For the responders, how did it feel to be asked that question? What are some of the responses to it? Huh? You felt that, glad to be asked, yeah. Did you feel like you were sort of embodying the script there and you're like, oh, thank goodness somebody's asking me about that? Yeah, even in practicing, it makes a big difference, which is why we need to practice it. So I would suggest that you think about kind of coming up with a way to ask that question so that you're ready when this happens. And I can promise you at some point in your life, it will happen that you will need to ask that question when somebody. All right.
A+. Congratulations, you're now card carrying, or certificate bearing gatekeeper. So your next job is to fill out the back part of the survey. And then when you're all done with that, you're gonna come up here, give us this paper and this paper. You can keep the blue one.